had the pleasure of sitting down with Liz Vogel, a radiant, beautiful human with such an incredible gift for helping people land exactly where they're meant to be. A multi passionate visionary and serial entrepreneur, Liz has been the driving force behind so many organizations that have reshaped their industries from the inside out. She's a seasoned traveler, a phenomenal swing dancer, and truly an artist of life. But one of the most beautiful things about Liz is the way she leads, with light, with curiosity, and with a heart wide open. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did.
I'm literally just so excited to be chatting with you more. Like we've been talking all day, but like it's fun to intentionally sit down now and have this moment between us.
Tell stories.
Tell stories.
Because we like that.
Which I'm dying to hear more about what you said about the light.
Oh, Angle of the Light. So that is the name of a quote unquote book that I have decided to write. I'm not a professional writer by any stretch of the imagination, but over the years, I have had a life well lived and not always in the proverbial box. And so sometimes when I have told stories, I go somewhere, I come back and I tell a story. Somebody's always like, well, you should write that down. And then in the last 10 years, when my father was sort of towards the end of his life with Alzheimer's, one of the things that I did with him is I videotaped him telling his stories and his memories, which was wonderful. So now that he's passed, I will bring that up and I can listen to the stories, which is great. I get his voice and his animation and all of that. Well, I'm not doing the video, but I thought it would be good, probably from a couple different angles, to jot the stories down. And the first one I started with, and I think I changed the name of it a couple times. I'm not sure, I can't remember what the first title was, but I remember being about 4 years old, and in our house in Burlington, Vermont, my parents had added a living room, and it was about 20 feet long and about 14 feet wide, and it was floor to ceiling windows on 3 sides, and it sat under this big maple tree, and it faced west. And so I have these memories of the fall, and I don't know if I was even in kindergarten at that age, but my mom would set me up with crayons and art projects in the living room as she was getting dinner done. And I remember the light as it would start to set in like late September coming through the western windows, but they would filter through the trees, and the light would just dance across the rug, and then it would sort of kind of lick the bottom of the floors or the stairs, if you will. And I just remember being mesmerized by that. But it was also, she always played music. Music was always playing in our house, whether it was jazz or classical or I have no idea what else. But she was so good. And I just remember music, the smell of dinner, the light, and doing art, which I loved. And I just remember that flicker. So that was sort of the nudge for the title. But as I started thinking about different places I've been, and this is a perfect example actually on your back porch, right? It's starting to get a little later in the afternoon. The angle of the light is a little different than it was at noon. For me, it will always be, moments are always wrapped in the angle of the light.
I'm shook. I feel that way every time you talk, but oh my gosh.
And I don't know where that came from particularly. I mean, I don't know where that observation came. I remember also being about 4 and going to art class at Fleming Museum, again in Burlington, Vermont. And like a lot of museums had these really deep inset stairs, so you couldn't really, you didn't know if you were supposed to take 1 step or like 1.5 steps or 2 steps. And a 4-year-old, it was more like 3 or 4 steps. But I remember I had a pink outfit on. I remember the angle of the light coming in through these big museum windows. And I was going upstairs. I had trying to make my way. And I still remember the smell of the museum. But it was the angle of the light. Yeah.
Did you ever go to the Science Museum in Boston where they have the musical stairs?
Yes, I love those.
Well, yeah, where you run up and every time your foot hits, it's playing a different tune or something, a different tone.
Oh, yeah. That is childhood for adults right there.
Yeah, I would do that right now.
Yeah.
If I was there just running up and down.
Yeah, everything was so much fun. But yeah, it's sort of, maybe it's a combination of music and light. I don't know. Smells probably. I think it's very for me. It's probably very sensory.
Mm.
Things are about how I feel, or how things make me feel. And I think the sun through those long windows was just, it was a very safe space and fun space. Yeah.
Do you think that's like a lot of memory is the sensory around them, sensory experience around them that makes them stick?
It's a great question. For me, it is. Like, I will remember this afternoon going up into Highlight Canyon with you. I will remember coming down the dirt road to find your home. The sound of the gravel, again, the angle of the light. And then not also for me, I think is, we talked about this afternoon. I'm sort of the perpetual child of curiosity, and I don't have a lot of preconceived ideas of what something will be. Matter of fact, I actually I don't know if we've talked about this, but I gave up expectations when I was 34. I haven't had an expectation since I was 34 years old.
34.
Mm-hmm.
What happened there?
I was getting my master's degree, and it was in organizational communication. Actually, it was Master's of Ed in Counseling, Psych, Adult Development, I think. And I had a great professor, Delight Champagne was her real name. She married Lyle Champagne, so her parents didn't do the whole thing for her. But she taught us pearls of wisdom forever, and I still use them almost every day of my life. And they were just so good. And she would talk to us, and she was just such a warm and delightful and great teacher. But how do I want to say this? She just talked to us to educate us. We never felt like we were getting a lecture about something. Mm. And so, but one of the things that she stated was people get angry or frustrated over failed expectations, but those expectations are rarely stated. So another student friend of mine, we went out afterwards and we're talking about this, and it's like, what if we tried not having any expectations? Like, we could have gone the other way and just been, frankly, very state all of our expectations to the world. But we decided to suspend expectations. But what Delight had also taught us was, it was like being at the optometrist's office for emotions. She would pose a certain situation to us, and she'd go, what would be your emotional response to this situation? And like, I'd say anger. And she goes, is it really though? And I'd say, yeah, no, it's anger. And she goes, okay. And she'd talk, and she goes, like 5 minutes later, she goes, you still angry? And I said, no. She goes, what are you? I'm like, disappointed. She goes, okay. And like 5 minutes later, she goes, are you still disappointed? I'm like, no, I'm sad now. So what she did was she taught us this sort of continuum of emotions that can lead to a more passionate one, or maybe a more expressive one. But I've never been angry more than 5 minutes in my life. I move on to other things. So I don't have expectations, but I have hopes and dreams and desires, anticipation, a wide range. But expectation has a very sharp edge. You either meet it or you don't. And so for me personally, whenever I tell this to people, they're like, I don't think I could have a world without expectations. You're a boss, don't you have expectations? I said, no, I have hopes. I have hopes that people will do it well. I have hopes that they have learned what I've taught. I have hopes that they'll do it their own way. I have aspirations and things like that, but I gave up expectations when I was 34, and I've never had one since. Every once in a blue moon, I'll go, well, yeah, but I can't actually get the word expectation out, and I walk it back.
Was that like an easy transition of thought?
Yeah. Once I was aware that there's sort of this continuum, maybe, of different emotions that can sometimes lead to another one, not always, or that I also have the choice to let something go. And that's been sort of decades in the making, because we all have experiences of, I don't think I have any grudges. I've never held a grudge. And there are a couple situations in my life that warranted them. And I chose not to. I chose just to kind of let it go and move on. It wasn't like any higher power, look at me, I'm so existential. It was just like, I got other things to do. I'm going to move on. Far more base.
Oh my God. She's got apps to do. She's got organizations to
run.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But Delight was, she had a couple others. She taught us that, again, I use this almost all the time. Whether you're 3 or 83, all anybody wants in this life is to be recognized for who they are and what they've done. Period. It's not any more complicated than that, if you think about it.
Yeah.
You just want people to appreciate and recognize that you're there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in a business environment, whether you're on a multi-panel Zoom call or you're actually in person or you're just meeting friends, to take a moment and just go, hey, how are you? And if you can use their name, even better, right? Because especially if it's on like a Zoom thing, so that they know. But just recognize them for showing up that day.
That's the bar.
That's it.
Sometimes I think like we all just want to be seen, like truly seen for who we are. But you're right. Sometimes it's just being seen is the most important thing for us.
But I think you're bringing it to a really nice other level, though. So if I do lectures at work and I'm saying, I say that phrase 3 or 83, and people are like, okay, well, I'll walk my halls and I say hi to my people. This year, actually, where I work, we're going to have a campaign, and it's the power of one. And so it is, and actually our founder, so I work at Moffitt Cancer Center, and our founder, Lee Moffitt, is still alive. He's 85 years old. And when he started the Cancer Center, he said, one person can make a difference here. So never underestimate your power. So we didn't purposely take it from him, but it does couple nicely with the origins of the hospital. But the power of one word, thanks, hi. The power of one compliment that is sincere. It's not just, hey, thanks for showing up like I just talked about. It's like, Amy, I mean, that was just such an amazing afternoon. And the fact that you thought to do that it just really made my day. Like that just really moved me. Something specific so you've been seen. The power of, so the compliment, the support, the kind word, the power. Sometimes we hear about people in the hospital who work there who maybe have a job that's not on the same level as a physician, but they do other wonderful work and they keep the hospital safe and clean and all this kind of stuff. And they're so good. And yet they can park their car in a lot that's far away and walk into the hospital and feel like they haven't been seen. And they go do their job. And part of their job is not to actually get in the way of somebody rolling a gurney down the hallway or something like that. But their job is incredibly important. And we heard a story that broke my heart, and somebody went into a break room where everybody is welcome, but somebody at a higher status, quote unquote, said, you can't have your break in here. You need to find someplace else to go. And so the head of this division said they feel invisible. So we're going to do a program called A Day in the Life of Being Invisible and outline ways that none of us intend, but we don't necessarily look up as we're approaching somebody in the hallway and just go, hey, how are you? Or thank you for that.
And to call it out with that title, just not shamelessly, but just saying it.
We're all, whether it's the hospital, whatever, we're all so busy. Do you pay attention to the person at the checkout or the gas station, or do you pay attention to the person who's serving your food or at the desk? Or it's not really even just the service stuff. I mean, it's just, right? It's any one of us. It's that 3 or 83 with a little bit of specificity.
That might be why the story about getting pat on the head really stopped me in my tracks. Right. Will you tell me that again?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my own business, and it was called Dots Inc., and it was connecting the dots between people, communities, and information. And it was founded to provide a digital service for adult children providing care for their aging parents, because I found myself in that role twice at 2 different times with both my mother and my father. And I just thought there was a better way to provide care. And I should say I'm going to own it. I designed it, and ran it through a whole bunch of people, and it really received actually very good feedback. And people like, you've really thought of something. You found a market that nobody has paid attention to. So I got really excited about it. And a friend of mine knew a gentleman who was in the tech industry, very high up, very influential at a very well-known company. And he thought that his friend might be interested in joining the company. And this gentleman really could take us places. So I wanted to entertain it. I brought him up. We talked business. We went out to dinner. We did all this stuff. The next day he came over, and we were all sitting in my living room. And he said, you've got something really good here. Of course, I'd want to be CEO. And I was like, well, gosh, no. This is my company. I was kind of thinking of you for the COO role. And he was walking around the room, and I was sitting down, and he passed me and he patted me on the head, and he's like, you really don't have what it takes. And I was like, okay, and we're done. Thanks for playing.
Yeah, how did you navigate that conversation from there? So you're in your house, in your living room, you guys are relaxed and sitting down. He's kind of power pacing around and patting you on the head.
Yep. And so, one of the things we talked about this too, one of the things I tend to do is I'll find people where they are. So he obviously had thought about this. He had, a pitch that he wanted to do. I think he probably assumed that, and he wasn't far off on this. Like, I probably had taken it in some ways as far as I could personally. I really probably could have benefited from a COO, just not a CEO. And he overstepped his hand, and the friend that we had in common, I looked across the room and his eyes just shut the moment this gentleman said, I want to be CEO. And he was like, he knew that it was kind of over there. But so I listened to him, and I just said, I appreciate where you're coming from, but this is my company. This is my idea. This is literally me. I do this caregiving all the time. This is in essence me. So no, thank you. And at that point, I didn't even want him as COO because I didn't feel like he would probably be comfortable in that role. He wanted the CEO role. So we parted ways. He did a mea culpa email, and if I ever wanted to talk again, and no, thank you. Tempting. Yeah, no.
That bridge isn't getting rebuilt.
No. Yeah. Bless him. As we say in the South, bless his heart for trying, but. Oh.
One thing that Brene Brown says is there's a story of the marble jar, which I love, and I feel like he took a lot of marbles out of the jar in that moment.
Tell me that, because I don't know what that is.
Okay, so if I'm remembering the story right, Brene Brown was talking about her daughter Ellen at school. There was a marble jar in the classroom, and when someone in the room, did something good that benefited the group, or was just a good move, marbles got put in the jar. When something bad happened, marbles got taken out. The jar gets to a certain point, they get like some prize or something. And I don't remember if Ellen realized it or Brene did, in something where Ellen had something happening with one of her friends. And they brought up the metaphor of the marble jar in friendships or relationships, where the good interactions, the supporting, the loving, the noticing, of all different levels, marbles are getting put in the jar. But then when trust is broken or something happens, an overstep, a misstep, marbles are getting taken out. And so
there were. Yeah. I don't think this gentleman took tons. Like, he didn't deflate me, but it wasn't what I anticipated happening or hoped, right? And I can't even say expected anymore, right? So I had hoped that there would be a good partnership of somebody who knew stuff that I didn't. And the other gentleman was our mutual friend, he knew the technology. I knew the concept of the product and frankly, the segmentation, market segmentation. And what I'm not great at is really the finances when it comes to that. I can do strategy till the cows come home, but you really probably don't want me running long-range financial models. And I think he was in a business that he would know how to grow a company. And I'm okay with that. But could we at least start in our swim lane? And at some point, if I felt like I couldn't handle it, I would have been happy to give it over. And I always recognized that there was probably going to be a point with a startup that my knowledge was good, but I wouldn't, at some point, I'd run out of my own skill set
Mm.
and not know how to do something beyond that. And I was fine with that, just not then.
Yeah.
And
Just
in
not
the
then.
pat on the head sort of way. I'm not a dog. I mean,
Yeah.
just like,
Not the finest moment for building camaraderie.
no, things not to do.
Hmm.
Not to do. But it was good. It was the best thing I ever did in my life.
But so was that the first time you'd started a company, or had you done it before?
I had done, quote unquote, I had done it before, but I had started one called Jump, sort of like taking a leap, which is exactly what I was doing. I had been working for corporate America. I think I had been downsized. I wanted to start to do something different. So I started a little LLC where I was my own consultant. So I didn't have a staff, I didn't have anybody, and I really didn't do a great job. There weren't a ton of clients, but I did get hired by Harrods of London with that one. And then I finished that and then closed it out and went back to work. So,
and were you in the States at the time? Or were you?
I was in the States when I started Jump, and I was hired by American people, business people who I'd worked with before at another company, who happened to know the chairman of Harrods Limited in London. And the chairman wanted some expertise to look at their e-commerce site and also their sort of organizational structure. So that's more my area. And there was a team of 4 and 2 leads that were brought over to London. And it was an insane, not in a great fun way, experience. To the point where when I would come home and tell the stories, people are like, you got to write that down. I'm like, not until Muhammad Al Fayed is dead, man, because he was the chairman. Are you remembering some of this?
No, I'm just wondering if I can ask you to share one story.
Oh my God. There are so many. Yes, you can. Okay, I'll skip to sort of the 3/4 of the way into my duration with them. I did leave the group at a certain point because I felt like, frankly, my life was in danger and my integrity was compromised. So let me give you 3. Let me see if I can do 3 examples. The first one was when we were hired, they cleaned out a space in the top of Harrods, an office for us, and they set it up.
What is Harrods?
Harrods of London is one of the most prestigious department stores in the world.
Okay.
And it is high end, and princes and queens and all sorts of people shop there. And it's just been around forever. And it's very elegant and very expensive. And yeah.
Okay. So you're at a headquarters, you're at a department store location?
We were at, there is only one. So we were at the Harrods in London. And what was interesting is there is the Harrods. It's a little bit like Disney World. There's the Harrods that everybody walks through and sees all clothes and all that kind of stuff. And then you go through what seems like the wall, but it's a maze of tunnels that actually go all through the city to other departments. And there is the world of setting up Harrods every night. That's when they change all the displays and all that stuff. All that is brought in from the back hallways into the store, and it magically refreshes every morning, and new things are out, and everything is cleaned and gleaming and all this kind of stuff. So there is a world that is not shiny and bright behind the doors of Harrods. And Muhammad Al Fayed was the father of Dodi Al Fayed, who was with Princess Di.
Okay.
So there was a statue in one of the areas of Harrods of Di and Dodi and stuff like this. And Muhammad never forgave the royal family for all sorts of stuff. But anyway, he was probably in his late 70s, maybe early 80s at the time. I never knew how our 2 lead account people knew him. And then I'm not really sure why all of us were selected, but we were. And we went over. And so they cleaned out an office area for us. They literally just moved people one day out of their cubes and offices, and they redecorated it for us, and we were put in there. The day before we started, he said there were 2 women, 2 men on the team, and they said for the women, you need to wear at least 3-inch heels. You must wear dresses above the knee or skirts.
Above.
Yes. And I think I don't know, there's a couple other sort of requirements. And so we were meeting, just gathering as a team for the first time after kind of arriving there in our little office, and the door opens. We heard this noise. We didn't know what it was. So Al-Fayed used to walk down the back hallways of Harrods with 6 basically henchmen with semi-automatic rifles, because he was part of the Egyptian mafia, and he was fearful that the royal family was out to kill him. So the look on your face is priceless. So he opens the door. We're sitting in a little circle. We are dutifully dressed. He pulls up a chair and he sits next to me. And we go around and sort of introduce. And he takes his hand and he puts it on my knee. And he goes, "And who are you, darling?" And I gently pat his hand and I put it back on his knee. And I said, "I'm Liz Vogel," and all this kind of stuff. And he put his hand back on my knee. And I'm like, "Oh, like, really? I just flew over here. Like, is this what the game is going to be?" Sort of a thing. And somebody told me in HR, if you walk around Harrods and you notice these sales women, young ones, and notice if they have 4-carat diamond studs in their ear. And if they have, that was a gift for spending some time with the chairman of Harrods. And they were petrified to say anything or leave. So it was a very, obviously toxic is the least of the words. Somebody in IT decided to disagree with him. His name was, I think, Dave. And Dave disappeared off the face of the earth. Nobody ever saw him again. His wife never saw him again. He never went home. He just disappeared one day. He was taken out, was the word on the street. So the second story I'll tell you is time goes on, and I think I'd wandered the halls and gotten lunch or something like this, and he had an assistant that he had in the office with us. Her name was Rosanna Penny, and she was in there, and I came back with a brown bag that I'd gone down to the food hall and gotten my stuff, and I had picked up a piece of chocolate cake for my colleague that she had wanted. So I put it on her chair, and Rosanna was like, "Oh, she's really going to like the chocolate cake." And I was like, "Excuse me?" And she goes, "The chocolate cake that you just paid for down in this particular food hall." And I'm like, "How do you know that?" And she goes, "We know everything." And I didn't really know what she was talking about. Well, time went on, and Rosanna came to the door of our office one day, and she put her index finger to her lips. And she apparently had some altercation with the chairman. Now she knew what happened to Dave, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she put her index finger to her lips. She took off her heels and she started tiptoeing around the office. And she started pulling cameras out of plants and microphones out of the ceiling. And then she indicated for us to follow her up to the rooftop of Harrods where the generators were that would block signals. And we were freaking out at this point. It's kind of like the Bourne Identity met The Devil Wears Prada. I mean, it was just, what is going on? And I remember there was this guy, Stan, that was on the team. And we went up to the rooftop, and she said, "The office is bugged. Your hotel is bugged. Your hotel room has cameras," because he owned the hotel that we were staying in. And she said, "I don't know where the other bugs are." But she looked at Stan and she said, "Actually," and I thought, this can't get any weird or more movie-like. And she said, "Stan, take your shoe off." And she literally did the thing you see in the movies, and she twisted his heel and she took out a tracking device. So somebody had gotten into his room, put a tracking device in his shoe, and Stan's writing on a piece of paper, because he didn't, at this point, he is I think he was over 65. He did not want to be part of this. And he's like, bar martinis now. And we went across the street and we're like, what did we sign up for? It was insane. It was absolutely insane.
Tell me what your role was again.
So I was supposed to, it morphed a little bit. Mine was supposed to work with the Human Resource Office and try to figure out the best sort of personnel structure for the digital team, sort of digital transformation, if you will, at that time. And were they set up to really transform the website for Harrods and all this kind of stuff. But they all knew they were about to get axed. Nobody would say boo because they didn't want to get axed the way that Dave got axed. And I would hear stories from one brave woman who was willing to share, and they lived in hell. They just lived in hell. But he was part of Egyptian mafia, so you kind of never, it wasn't even whether he or his henchmen were going to get you. It's like, who does he know? And you know, do you turn on your key? I mean, it was really out of a movie.
You get in some cab.
Yeah.
And
and you never come home. It was insane and surreal. So when I have a bad day at work, I go, is everybody still here? Are any tracking devices?
You check your heels?
I check my heels, see if they twist off. It was insane. And I never, well, I did share with friends some of those stories, and they're like, you need to write it down, you need to write it down. I'm like, not until he's dead. And he did die in the last year or so.
You know, I was wondering, honestly, how dramatic you were being when you said that. I'm, waiting for him to pass away before I tell these stories. Good Lord. That's some real
Didn't see
stuff.
that coming.
No, I gotta be honest, that was a curveball. Every conversation with you feels like a curveball, though.
There's always something. There's a guy in the place with a thing, you know.
Oh my God.
It was insane. We used to go up to the rooftops to have any sort of conversation during the day so it would block any signal.
That was a frequent thing.
Yeah.
How long did you stay in that situation?
Not that long. I think I went over in March and I left in July. And Stan left pretty quickly. He was done. He didn't have to work. He had signed on to this, as kind of something to do in retirement. I just felt so compromised, but also there was a real point in there where I was just afraid. Like, do I leave? And how much can I endure? And all this kind of stuff. And then there was another woman who stayed for a long time. And I think there was another gentleman, Carl. He didn't stay as long. But I think the woman was actually going through a divorce at home. So there wasn't really a safe, I don't want to say safe space in the same way, but, she needed some other place to be. So she sort of endured it. But we would go out and walking going, and I remember catching up with Carl a couple of years later going, I feel like it was all made up in my mind. Like did I dream this?
Like a fever dream?
He goes, no, all that stuff happened. And I'm like, well, that's just insane.
So around what year was this?
2008. I remember very specifically.
Pretty dang recent.
Yeah. 2000, I think I went over 2007, 2008 maybe.
Can I say that? Recent when it was 16 years ago?
Feels like recent though, doesn't it?
Wow.
In the blink of an eye. Yeah. What else do you want to know?
Oh my God.
Ever told you that story?
No, you never. No. But now, I mean, as you started to get into it, Harrods did come up. But because I do remember you talking about the like behind the walls, and the place shape shifting overnight. But the thought of the tunnels and the guns and
yeah, it was really insane. There was also Al Fayed had, and I'm trying to remember if this was the Queen's painter or his painter. I think it was his, must have been his. They had a person hired just to do portraits of, because they would get kings and queens from all over the world. And they were always brought in through sort of a back entrance. Nobody ever saw them. They kind of went through very lovely tunnels to get to a very special sort of staging area, and they would have, personal shoppers basically go and get whatever they wanted. But anyway, the painter guy, Al-Fayed didn't. I don't know what he did. He showed up at our office one day, and he was an elderly gentleman, and maybe he wasn't a painter, maybe he was a photographer. I can't remember, but anyway, he had been around for over 20 years, and Al-Fayed wanted him gone. So he asked the other woman that I was working with to fire him. He was brought up to our office. She didn't want to do it. She didn't show up. I was sitting in the room, and he's going, "Why am I here? What's going on?" And he just started getting more and more and more agitated. And finally she came in, and I was just like, I waved goodbye, and she's giving me this look like, "Don't leave me alone, don't leave me alone, don't leave me alone." And she had to fire this guy with no real explanation. She wasn't his boss, but Al-Fayed would have people do all sorts of things that he wanted them to do that he didn't want to do. Very interesting gentleman. My last day there, I gave my notice. I gave it in advance. And I was alone in the office, and I heard he and the henchman coming down the hallway. And I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Like, is this how I'm going out? But he walked in, and he took my hand, and he said, "Liz, and thank you for your service. Thank you for being here." He seemed like a real gentleman, until he said, "I'd like you to spend the night with me." And my only response that I could come up with that wouldn't get me killed basically was, "Oh, sir, I'm very honored, but I could never keep up. Thank you." And I just left the room. Like, I'm out of here. He didn't follow, thank God.
I'm sorry, but I couldn't keep up. You are a quick thinker.
I don't know where that came from, but I was like, I don't want to insult him. Gives me the heebie-jeebies.
That's iconic. You're the coolest.
Not really. I just find myself in strange situations.
Oh, yeah, okay, we gotta back up here because, so you were born in Vermont.
Yeah.
We had the angle of the light coming in and this like creative childhood and all these sensory memories. What comes next? How do we get from there to there?
Oh, well, let's see if I can leapfrog us pretty quickly. Vermont, graduated from high school. I was the youngest of 4 children. And my sister, who's 9 years older, graduated from University of Vermont with her high school sweetheart. They got married, and he was coming out to Bozeman, Montana for his master's degree in geology. So she moved with him. My next oldest was 2 years younger than that. He went to Kansas State College, met his wife, who was from Billings, Montana. So when he finished school, they moved to Billings. The next one in line before me was my brother John. He went to Penn State, became an architect. His first job offer was Billings, Montana. And so I was 4 years younger than him. And when I was applying for college, and by this time I had been out here and loved it. And Montana State at Bozeman had an art program. And I applied and I got accepted, and I was so excited. I'm like, "Hey, I get to follow the family." And within 1 year, they all left. But I stayed for about 9.5 years, 8 here in Bozeman and about 1.5 years in Billings. And then there weren't any jobs in the West at the time, so I went back east, got a job at Keene State College in Human Resources, and my husband got married within a year, fell in love, first sight. He still is 7 years younger than I am. Robbed the cradle on that. We moved to Durham, New Hampshire, to the University of New Hampshire, worked there for a while. And then I went to get my master's in Springfield College. And from there, I was getting a master's in ed in counseling, psych, adult development. And I worked with the provost creating or designing, we never built it, let me try to say this in English, an elite recreational facility for elite disabled athletes. We partnered with a gentleman named Cy Newhouse, who actually owned most of the print magazines in the United States, and he lived in Boston, and his son was a quadriplegic. So we partnered there. It never really went anywhere, but I got into technology. So the head of technology at Springfield College said, how would you like to start the first college sports news digital website in the United States for all the colleges and universities on the East Coast? And I remember looking at him going, Russ, I don't know anything about technology, and I know less about sports. And he goes, I think you're perfect for this. And so I said, okay, yes. So we partnered with NESN, New England Sports Network, and the Red Sox, and we built the first digital online college sports news website for the East Coast, which was then bought out by the Red Sox, and then I think it went over to the NCAA. From there, I was already in digital world.
Wait, I have questions.
Yes. No, but wait.
But wait, there's got to be more. So why were the Red Sox involved?
Because that's a great question. Let me see if I can remember the answer.
Like, was it baseball focused? Was it all sports?
All sports, all divisions, Division 1, 2, and 3, college, university size. So they had, I think what it was they had NESN, and they were just starting in the digital world, media world, because this was in the mid-90s. So e-commerce wasn't even a thing then, if anybody can believe that. So, and Russ, who was the head of technology at Springfield College, had gotten a grant from Lotus Notes, if anybody remembers what that was, but that was a software application way back. So we got the software for free. I think they ponied up some probably grant for this, because the other part of it wasn't just building the online news sports website. I developed, I just laugh when I say this because, again, I know nothing about technology and sports, but I created a curriculum for undergrad and graduate program for people to learn about sports writing, digital sports writing. So some of our first graduates went on to CNN online sports. They were part of the first wave. So we did that.
How do you develop a curriculum on something that you personally don't know a lot about in the 90s when
Google wasn't a thing?
Yeah.
And ChatGPT didn't exist.
Where do you start?
You partner with a professor who knows how to write a curriculum. He was in the English department, and Russ was in technology. And I don't even know what to tell you what department I was in, because I didn't know technology, sports, or writing. I'm one of the worst writers ever. So the fact that Russ had faith in me to do this, it was one of the first steps in a lifetime of having somebody to present an idea that doesn't sound like it makes any sense whatsoever. And my response has always been, okay, yes. And I leap, I jump. That's where jump came from. So I did that, and then
I got more questions.
Okay. I'm just a little chatterbox. And then when I was 4,
well, I love it. But what do you think he saw in you then?
I have been told this over the years, so there was a theme: creativity, an ability not to see a box, unbridled. I will use that. In that I'm willing to have a go at it, and not be inhibited by rules. A lot of the things I've done, I have to think about this before I make this statement, but we can test this. A lot of the things I've done had never been done before. So an online digital sports website, CNN was starting it at the professional, but they hadn't really gotten it up and going. Russ had a real vision, and he had been in technology for a long time. And when I moved over to the business side of the world in Boston and worked for Digitas, we were doing the first e-commerce real website, and that was over in London. And we hadn't expanded it. Nobody had done e-commerce. It was for a Christmas release, which means we had to build something and have it ready. I still remember the date, by September 17th, because that's really when the holiday shopping season starts, and we had no idea what we were doing. And it didn't always work.
Do you remember how the first e-commerce season went?
Yeah, vividly. The first e-commerce season was a little bumpy. We had a great team though. So Digitas was Boston-based. We, I believe, bought out a small, small boutique firm in London. A lot of those people didn't stay, but we had this wildly ethnically diverse team from around the world. And then we also had Digitas had offices in San Francisco, I think Chicago, New York, Boston, London, Hong Kong, and I want to say there was maybe Miami. And so we literally worked around the clock with different offices when we could, bringing things together. But it was before Zoom and it was before video calls and all this kind of stuff. And I remember we used to have the star phone, the old star phone. And because it was so brilliantly diverse in culture and everybody kind of had different accents, it was not uncommon for somebody to pose an idea and then there'd be this little pause and somebody go, what? And then you kind of hear around the globe, what? And we were just trying to figure out what the person had said. We weren't trying to be rude, but we just, we're up against the clock. We had to hire outside consultants to come in who had some expertise in it. I remember we were doing user testing on the site, and the credit card of the CEO of the client kind of went out into the world. That was a oops moment. We pulled it back. They wanted everything to kind of work seamlessly across 4 major. It was like Home Depot, CVS, Virgin Records. I forget what the other one was. There was a 4th one. It didn't go seamlessly. And Christmas doesn't move. It just doesn't. So I remember being over there for Christmas on Christmas Eve at a restaurant at 12:59 or 11:59 going, we had to launch the sale for the after Christmas Day. And we worked from 6 in the morning, sometimes till 1 in the morning. I would go home and sleep with my BlackBerry.
You put your hand by your face for that.
Mm-hmm.
Did you sleep with it right by your face?
Yeah, it was by my pillow because I would wake up and I would have these ideas or things I needed to remember. And we had a phone system where I could leave sort of a silent message for someone's voicemail. And I'd be like, Bob, Sally, we need to remember to do this thing tomorrow. Like I hardly ever slept. But when the team would do something, they'd get it, they'd figure something out. There was this guy, Jordy. I don't remember what the soundtrack was, but he would just blare that song and everybody would get up and they'd dance and they'd celebrate and everybody supported everybody. It was fantastic and it was hard as hell. But I'm still friends with a lot of those people. It's just, it was hard work that nobody had ever really done.
Yeah.
So, I had a picture of a female knight in armor on my desk in Vermont when I went back and I was working where I met you. And it was a woman in armor, masked down, joust up, in front of a big cave with a black opening. And I put the bubble wording in it, and it said, I wonder what's in here. And that is me to a T. As long as I'm sort of armed, have some skill set, I'm kind of willing to go into the big dark cave going, I wonder what's in here. I don't know if that's wise, but
never know what you're going to find.
You never do.
The phrase, well, we'll see what happens, has come up recently, or come up a lot for me. And recently it ended up with me getting bucked off a horse after a dog bit my horse in the face. Yeah. So we'll see what happens peeking into the dark cave, you never really know.
You never really know. But, one of the things I used to hopefully helped the leaders at the hospital where I work was when COVID hit. And you heard this all around the globe. We were not unique in any stretch of the imagination. Leaders were like, I don't know how to deal with this. I don't know what to do with a pandemic. I don't know how to work remotely. I don't know how to do this, that, and the other thing. And what we would just say to them is, well, maybe not, but maybe so. Has anything ever in your life changed on you? Yes. Have you ever had to lead people before? Yes. Have you ever had to lead them through a tough time before? Yes. So you find the things that, have you ever ridden a horse when something unexpected has happened? Yes. Have you ever been bucked before? Probably. You know how to do it. You've got it. Maybe just not all blended together in that little concoction, but you've got it.
You don't seem that worried about mystery ever. Maybe for that reason, for that approach, or?
That's a great observation, Amy McGann. No, I'm more curious about it. There was a movie long time ago, Shakespeare in Love, I think, with Gwyneth Paltrow, and I don't remember who played Shakespeare. I should, but Jeffrey Rush was in it. He was one of the actors, and he was supposed to urge Shakespeare to finish his play, I think was the essence of his character. And somebody was always after Jeffrey Rush to go, is it done? Is it done? Is it done? And he always had this line, which I loved. And somebody would go, well, is it done? He goes, not yet. And he goes, well, they were like, well, how's it going to end? And in his very Jeffrey Rush voice, he'd go, I don't know. It's a mystery. And I walked through, actually, a lot of my work days, I would go with my team. It's just a joke. And they're like, well, how's this going to work? I'm like, I don't know. It's a mystery. We'll figure it out. How do you want it to end?
But that sounds like an expectation.
Mm-mm.
No, that's a hope.
No, that's not even a hope. That's a curiosity. How do you want it to end?
How do you imagine it might end?
Yes.
Question mark.
Yes. And my yes and. Yeah, when we talked a little bit about this earlier today. One of the questions I will ask people when they're, whether it's a personal life or business life, is you pick the time frame, whatever it needs to be, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. Nobody really goes too much farther than 18 months anymore. We used to ask the question and ask for 10 years out. That's just impossible to do now. It's like, I have no clue what's going to happen on Tuesday. And you walk into your life and it's working the way it needs to. Maybe not how you think it's going to or hope or whatever, but how it needs to. Like, it's really, but you do it in a really positive way. Like, it's clicking. You've got what you need and you're excelling, and it's, you're able to kind of reach a little higher for whatever proverbial bar there is. And then tell me that story from the moment you put your feet on the floor in the morning. Like, what's going on? Who are you talking to? What are you imagining? What do you get to do? What do you get to influence or teach, or who do you want to talk to that day?
You just mentioned like a lot of personal interactions, not
what?
Yeah, not what are you doing? What does something look like? What does something feel like? A lot of who.
Yeah, and so we do infuse the what in there. So like, well, I don't know, do we? That's a great question.
Or it's at least interesting that you led with that, like when you personally are describing it.
Who do you want to interact with? Because, and you might be somebody who is really good not interacting with a lot of people during the day, and I respect those people. And I have my moments where, private time is a good thing. But I find if I ask who, I get a different type of story. If I say what, it's very, I'm cooking, I'm writing, I'm doing this thing. It's obviously very action oriented. Who? Well, what's fascinating about talking to Amy McGann every day? Like, oh my God, there's just so many reasons. There's 29 reasons why I would want to talk to Amy McGann every morning. But I just think it tells a different story, and it can lead you wherever you need to go. But the who, I think, they'll also tell you, usually when they describe the story, what they don't want. And that is a very specific question I will ask. I call it my 10:55 question in the work world, because if you're in a meeting from 10 to 11 and you're chatting and discussing all sorts of things, and this is a great interview question, actually. It's a bit of a trick question, and it's all in the delivery, but I'll be very gentle with the delivery, and I'll say, okay, those are all great ideas. What don't you want to have happen when we pursue this? And it's really interesting because there is a physical reaction if you are in the room. And even on Zoom, I've been able to watch it. People actually lean back and they go, oh, that's a good question. And they have to think about it because it's not a normal question. But when they answer in business anyway, that will be their cover their ass list. What don't you want to have happen? I don't want to lose money. I want, whatever. If you ask it in an interview, I'm very gentle with this too, because I don't want to scare the candidate off, but I will say, and I can say this at my age too, like I've had a good career and I've done a lot of different things. Is there anything at this stage in your career that you have done and mastered, but it would be really okay if nobody asked you to do that ever again, right? And I'll oftentimes partner that with, what do you want at this stage of your career? But it is and it's, again, it's a bit of a trick question, because what if they come back and they name like a core function of the job, but at least right? So yeah, the opposite question.
And what do you think the leaning back is when you ask things like that? Is that distancing themselves, like giving them space to answer? What is it?
That one is almost 100%. Nobody's ever asked them that question before. And it's kind of like, and they oftentimes will say, that's a good question. What I find fascinating is when, especially in an interview or even in business, we don't spend a lot of time asking that question. It is wildly revealing, though, of all the things to kind of either watch out for, pay attention to, or whatever. But nobody really asks that.
I imagine pretty revealing in any situation.
Yeah, I mean, really actually think about it in relationships. What don't you want to have happen? The other relationship question I learned from another woman when I was 21 here in Bozeman. Was it Bozeman? Might have been Billings. And I was sort of between, I hadn't finished my first degree. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wasn't going to be an artist. I wasn't going to be very good at it. And I had to come up with something else. So I went to see a career counselor. I saw Jean Dimich at what was then Eastern Montana College, which is now MSU Billings. And she asked me all the career questions. And I think she did some visualization and mapping and all this kind of stuff. But then she asked a brilliant question, which I have continually asked all my life to other people. And she was looking at my life holistically, which is rather avant-garde back in 1980. And she said, are you dating anybody? And I said, yes. And of course, it's Montana. I'm like, I'm dating a cowboy. I was very proud of that. And she never looked up when she asked the next question. And it was the most brilliant question, like of almost of all time. And she said, does he bring out the best in you? And before she finished, I knew how the question would end. And before she finished, I felt in the pit of my stomach, in my gut, that he didn't. And it wasn't that he was a bad person at all, but I wasn't my best self in that relationship. And so, of course, I was very proud in 21. And I said, oh, yes, but I was shaking my head side to side, like, no. And she went, And then she said, an important add-on to the question is, if there was something you could do that would allow that relationship to bring out the best in you, would you do it? And again, I was like, oh, sure. No, was the real answer. And again, not a bad person, just wasn't right for me. And so I have gone on and used that as a barometer in my life. So does my job bring out the best in me? Do my friends bring out the best in me? Do my activities bring out the best in me? Does my home, does my community? What brings out the best in me. And it is an emotional question that every single person answers in the pit of their stomach, in their belly, and never with their mind. The words might come from the mind, but it is at your core. It was a brilliant question. I loved her for that.
I loved her for that.
I have been surrounded by wonderful, wise women. And they're not always older. One of them I know is like 31, my idol. But you are. You are brave and you're courageous and you're articulate. And you went and did everything that you wanted to do so far, and you still have so much left to live. But you have boldly, courageously, probably holding your breath from time to time, gone and done that. And I admire that so much about you.
And same. Look at me, how lucky I am to have you in my life. And to think all the things that I haven't known about these near-death work experiences, but everything I have known, it's that grit and grace and just outward ease that I don't want to say floated through life, because I know it has not been floating. It can't be, but from the outside, it's always looked like this just graceful, this seamless, graceful floating through anything that I've been lucky enough to witness with you in life.
Well, thank you for that. I think I have to credit my parents. They taught me, I didn't know their lives until I was older, really, all of it. But both of them had different end of life experiences that went on each for over a decade for each of them. And one where my mom was wildly disabled due to a heart attack, and my father had Alzheimer's. So they both went through the sort of final stages of their world. And my father went second, so he kind of went through both. And he was a doctor, but he had a start that I don't know how a human survives it, and I'll share it in a moment. But he, both of them had grace under unbelievably difficult situations, and they modeled that. And I don't think they intentionally taught it. They just had it. And it was sort of a grace and elegance in despite of the worst possible situations. And I hope to God when I wasn't with them, that they let loose and were angry and frustrated and did all the things, healthy things that you need to do. We never saw that. They always had grace. But my father started out, he went to World War II. He grew up in Rutland, Vermont. He couldn't wait to join the Army like a lot of people. And his birthday was on Halloween, and he couldn't get in as the school year started. So I think he was with UVM, but he finally signed up and all this kind of stuff. He was in a MASH unit. He had started pre-med. And so because he was able to do that, he got into a MASH unit, and he was behind Patton. And so they were really on the front lines a lot of the time. And he ended his tenure with the Army. And I will balance this horrific story with two funny stories with him, but liberating Dachau concentration camp. They had to move bodies. They saw everything that happened there. He was 19. I don't know how a 19-year-old mind can even begin to process, and then also be in a MASH tent near the front lines and everything that they saw. I don't know how you survive that at 19 mentally. I just don't. And he went on to become a doctor, but he did, and he ended because they asked him to go into the tunnels underneath the camp, because that's where the Germans kept the medicine storage. And he went down with a buddy, and his buddy was in front of him and stepped on a landmine, was blown up, and then Dad was blown back and broke his back. And so he was on a stretcher and got shipped home. He went to the VA hospital over in White River Junction, New Hampshire. The nurse on the floor happened to be my mother. She was his first patient. And and nothing untoward, of course, but he used to chase her down the halls on his stretcher. But he was in a full body cast for a year and a half.
And in that hospital?
And in that hospital. So again, grit and grace. How does one 19, 20-year-old be still for a year and a half in a cast? Like,
the thought of chasing your mother.
oh, he was on a gurney, yes. And he used to apparently push himself from wall to wall down the hallway. And the story went that, and back in that day, they would carefully measure out every single room's medications and put it on a cart. He upset the cart. He was grounded. He wasn't allowed to chase her anymore. But he told two funny stories, and I'll just finish with this. But he told two stories that I didn't hear until I was in my possibly 50s, early 50s. And so he, again, MASH unit, frontline. He just worked a 36-hour shift, exhausted, heading back towards his tent. Some Jeep comes in with a captain, or I don't know the ranks above that, and the order was, boy, grab my bags. And my father's response was, get your own goddamn bags. I just worked a 36-hour shift. And he was demoted immediately. But they kind of needed his expertise, so he was reinstated like within 2 days. And then within the week, there was another visiting high-ranking surgeon, and the equipment they had was just awful to work with. And the surgeon was using clamps, but they weren't clamping, and he got very frustrated, and he kind of flexed his wrist, and the clamp fell at the floor and at my dad's feet, and my dad kind of jumped a little bit, and the doctor looked at me and goes, what do you think about that? And my dad's response was, seemed a little childish to me, but okay, demoted. And so he's telling me these stories. I'm like, that's where I get that gene.
Sounds really familiar.
Good.
Did you see that side of him ever? Was he playful in that way, like as your dad over the years? Or...
He was, as I got to know him and take care of him more. Dad was the only hematologist in the state of Vermont when I was growing up in the 1960s, and he would serve also some of northern Vermont. He worked 24/7 kind of. He was always on call. There was no other hematologist. And so that was leukemia. And so he was always on call. He hustled. He didn't get tenure when he thought he did. He ran the student clinic for UVM on top of being a doctor, on top of teaching med students. He did so many different jobs. He hustled to earn a living because he wasn't private practice. He got paid a teacher's salary, and he had a family of 4. So I have a lot of, but he was, I remember him sort of being tense. I also remember he was gone a lot. So he would go to the hospital. He had breakfast at 6 in the morning. He would be at the hospital for 7 for rounds. He would work all day, bring his peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and he would come home for 1 hour for dinner. And then, because he would do rounds in the morning with the med students, he would do clinics in the afternoon with the patients. And then he would go back at 7 at night, sometimes till 11, and he would one-on-one go to each of his patients and just talk. Answer, I'm going to get all checked up, answer any questions they had, give any bad news, because he would never do that with the students. He loved what he did, but I don't know how he did that. Most of his patients back in the 60s and 70s, they weren't advanced in leukemia treatment, and so most of them died. And then it got into the AIDS epidemic, and so that was a whole new thing. So most of his patients would pass away, and he had such compassion and such care, and he, I think, exhibited grit and grace for them to do whatever they needed to do.
That's incredible.
He was an amazing man. But after my mom passed, and after probably a couple of years, really of just finding his footing again, he was very impish. He always had a twinkle in his eye, and he was always up to something. And you always kind of wondered what. we would go on drives on the weekend, and one of the things we went down to Shelburne Vineyards one day, right? It's just outside of Burlington. It's like 11 in the morning, and they were doing a wine tasting. And he goes, "Let's go in." And I'm like, "Dad, like it's kind of early to start day drinking." And he goes, "Let's go have a taste." So we go in, and there's these two lovely young women behind the bar, and Dad saddles up, he's a little guy with a cane and stuff. And he goes, "We want to do a tasting." And they're like, "Okay, you know." He goes, "What do you have?" And she looked down and she goes, "Well, we've got some whites and we've got some reds. What do you want?" And he's like, "Well, what do you think?" And she looks and she selects some whites and stuff like that. And she brings them up and he tastes. He goes, "What else do you have down there?" And I'm, again, kind of clueless at this point of what's really going on. But they were dressed in rather low cut tops. I wasn't catching on. He had her bend over like 3 or 4 times. And I'm like, finally, I caught on because I think she caught on. And I'm like, "Daddy?" And he goes, "Hey, you stop looking, you're dead." Like, oh my God. And she just laughed and she was really good natured. I mean, he's an 82-year-old guy with a cane, but it wasn't like he was a lech, but like he would just, yeah.
Oh my gosh. But I think you told me that he would like flirt with your mom a lot, right? They
Oh
would,
yeah.
or and they would flirt.
Yeah, they would. And and again, after she passed, probably a little bit more information than I wanted to know, but he was very serious when he said it. I think it was a couple days after she passed, and he was just sort of looking straight ahead. And it was more a statement, obviously, than anything provocative. But he said, "She was such an amazing lover." And I was like, I'm glad they had that. You don't think about that with your parents. But I was like, I hope. I'm glad they had that. I'm glad he thought of her that way.
For him to share that with you too.
Yeah.
Just like what a raw moment between you in it together.
So I just realized I've had my bracelet on and waving around, so I hope it hasn't come through.
Oh, I don't know.
Otherwise, you're going to have a whole lot of stories with a lot of clanking going on.
Beats me.
But yeah, he was such a great guy. The other one that I liked was I would take him on these rides, on the weekends. So one of them, when all I had was my own company and I was just focused on that. And so I could make my own schedule, but I was doing some presentation. I was dressed in some tights. It was fall, beautiful autumn day. And I drove down to his residence. I'm like, "Let's go for a drive. Let's go up to Stowe. Let's go into some back roads of Stowe." But I had kitten heels, tights, and kind of a shorter skirt on. And he's like, "Okay." And he used to have these playlists and we would play them. And a lot of times it was like opera or whatever, or classical, and we would roll the windows down and all the cows in Vermont got to know us and we'll take a look as we drove by. We'd blare it. But anyway, I picked him up and we went up some back roads of Stowe. And Dad would see shots. He actually had a really good eye for photography. And he'd go, "Can you stop and pull over and take that picture? Can you stop and take that picture and that picture and stuff?" So I always would. So we're going up this dirt road in the back of Stowe. And it was a stunning day. And he goes, "Can you get a picture of that mountain over there?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So I got out of the car and I took my camera and I took a picture. And he goes, I think there's a better angle. Can you go just like to the other side of the road?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I can do that." And he goes, "I think could you just go into the pasture a little bit? Not far, but I think with the light, I think it'll be so spectacular." He was so serious. So I'm in kitten heels and tights and a skirt, like tiptoeing through cow patties
and
in
you had
a pasture.
To duck barbed wire.
Yeah.
To get through.
And I'm out there and I'm like, because I'm starting to get a little irritated. I'm like, "How's this?" And he goes, "A little more to your right." And I'm like, click, I take the picture, tiptoe through cow patties back. I hop in the car and I'm like, "I hope you're happy." He goes, "Best day ever." And he was just laughing. He goes, "I can't believe you did that." Like, oh, you're in so much trouble.
Oh my gosh. But on goes the music and
on goes the music.
drive.
Yeah. It was fabulous. He was a great guy. And my mother was wonderful, obviously, as well. But I got to know Dad in sort of better health before it declined with Alzheimer's. I got to know him quite well. So, yeah, that's good.
Oh. Well, I just thank you for Thank you for talking through all this with me about life and love and
Happy
the
to. It's a real
struggle.
pleasure
Oh,
and a privilege to be asked.
well, what do you think was the most surprising part of us sitting down?
That we
That
reconnected out of sort of a little out of the blue. I mean, we
out of
sort
an
of,
email, a
yeah,
missed email
yeah,
that almost went just into the ether.
I know. I got a pop up that said, check out Amy McGann on Instagram. I went, saw your site, was so impressed, loved the saying, which again, what's the right saying?
I honestly don't know.
But
But
it
I
was
want to hear how you,
interpreted
yeah,
it.
what stuck with you?
Um, Number one, I think it was the artistry of the site. And no, I'm being really, I was really, really impressed. And it was not your usual photography. It was not your usual clientele even. It wasn't cookie cutter. It was unique and it was you. And then the pictures of you with the horses and all this. And I'm like, you go. I mean, I thought that was really cool. And then I tripped over that phrase, which I'm assuming was for a client. And again, I probably don't have it quite right, but it was, I was not put on this earth to blend in. And it was just this moment I was having of identifying for myself, I am about to go through yet another life transition. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I know that I'm about to do this. And I was like, I was sort of on the fence of playing it safe a little bit. And I was like, no, man, I was not put on this earth to blend in. And if you think of the stories that I just shared with you, they don't blend in.
No, they do not.
They're not what you hear on any average day.
Which
And I
makes,
don't say that with ego. It's just, God, who would have ever guessed that would have happened?
yeah.
Right?
Well, if we're only here this one time, why not? Why not have some stories worth sharing?
Exactly. The angle of the light.
And I mean, we're back in Bozeman for the first time in what? How many years you said?
I left 40 years ago. I left Montana 40 years ago, but yesterday I drove past Montana State University, saw my dorm from 46 years ago, had a sandwich from the same sandwich shop 46 years ago, had ate it in a park that I used to watch Shakespeare in the park in the summer 46 years ago. I still remember the names of the streets as I drive by. And you took me this afternoon to the first place I ever went off campus 46 years ago, Highlight Canyon. So it is kind of this really fun, surreal. I mean, 46 years is a long time. And yet it's sort of a blink of an eye. And it's been really good. It wasn't like I had unfinished business that I needed to do, particularly. I just wanted to come back and see what it was like and feel like. And what was the angle of the light today?
You felt the pull.
I did. And it has been better. It has been a wonderful vacation. I still have a couple more days left. And it has been better every day than I ever could have anticipated or imagined. And it's not over.
No, we have unfinished business.
Well, we do.
We got to go to that steakhouse that has definitely been here for 46 years and chase down some dancing.
Yeah, we do. And you're going to have to take a little video so I can prove to people, because I have actually announced to most of the executive staff at the hospital that I was going to go do this and try to find dancing.
Oh, hell yeah.
And they're like, we want videos. And I'm like, you might not, but okay. We'll get them for you anyway.
We're going to deliver. Well, what a treat. Let's go get it done.
All right.
You know, when Liz sat down across from me, she said, I saw something on your website that stuck with me. I was not put on this earth to blend in. And in that moment, I remembered how easy it is for us to forget our own words. How often we write something that's meant to guide others, only to realize it was meant to guide us too. So I'll leave you with this. You also weren't put here to blend in. You weren't meant to water it down, smooth the edges, or wait for permission. You're here to live the story that only you can live. To follow the thread that's yours, even if no one else sees where it's going yet. I hope this conversation brought you back to something that's always been there. And if it did, let that be the beginning. The Stories That Form Us is a production of Unbridled Form, a brand strategy and design studio devoted to helping entrepreneurs and creatives tell the story that only they can tell. Through story-led branding, artistic design, and websites that feel like coming home, we help you uncover what's already true and build from there. To learn more, visit unbridledform.com and follow along at Unbridled Form. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next time.